your clients have asked you to attend a meeting, either in person or via a conference call. The date and time is set, and they put it in your diary. Occasionally, they'll need to bring forward the time of the meeting to suit everyone. Then they get a call from a colleague saying that something's come up, and they decide the meeting has to be put back to another day. No problem. In a way, they're quite relieved because they have a mountain of things to do, and they were worried that they might have to call off the meeting anyway. During the meeting, they have a number of issues they need to raise and deal with. They may have outlined the items in the agenda that they've circulated to everyone beforehand. This could take a while, and they might encourage their colleagues to join in the discussion. Sometimes they need to look into the matter before taking a final decision. If that's the case, they might note down all the points raised during the meeting. Some people don't like to be interrupted when they're talking. Others don't mind if somebody steps in with their point of view. There have been many times where I've had to cut in, especially when I thought a colleague was going on about something truly unimportant. So I often tell my colleagues that we need to press on with the items in the agenda. After all, there's nothing worse than having a meeting that drags on, is there? Welcome to the Word of Mouth English Studio channel, where we discuss all things accuracy, grammar, and help you with your speaking and writing strategies. In today's video session, we'll be talking about phrasal verbs, what they are, how to tell them apart from other types of collocation, and how to form them. We'll also be discussing types of separable verbs and inseparable phrasal verbs, and we'll be looking at them closely in some detail. Let's get started. You may have realized I've used a number of phrasal verbs in the past few minutes of my introduction. Can you spot them and identify them on my whiteboard? Here on the whiteboard, you'll find a variety of sentences that have been cut in half. So these are lots of half sentences here that need to be connected or joined to make one whole phrase or sentence or question. And here is the solution. How many of these sentences did you get right? You were asked to connect as many sentences as you could, and here were a variety of half sentences containing one phrasal verb each. So put it in your diary. Can we bring forward the time of the meeting? Something's come up, which could also be tied to or connected to, I'm afraid something's come up. So these two are both possible options here. There are some pressing issues we'll need to deal with. We may need to look into the matter. I'd like to take some time to weigh up the advantages and disadvantages. I'm sorry if this meeting's dragged on. And no, please, go on. Do you mind if I step in? And no, of course not. There are times where I've had to cut in or step in. So this is the affirmative, whereas this should be a question because of the question endings. So you should have been able to identify which of these sentences were interrogatives, positives, and negatives. Let's put back the time of the meeting. Should we call off the meeting? I'm afraid we'll need to press on with the issue. So think about how many of these phrasal verbs you've already used versus how many of them you've heard or read but haven't yet experimented with using in your own speaking and writing. Think of how you could use them in sentences of your own. And have you identified all the phrasal verbs, or have you just matched the sentences? Well, matching the sentences is the first step, but would you be able to find alternative words for, or substitutes for, or we call them synonyms, for each of the phrasal verbs you see here? Let's have a look at what other words they could mean, or what synonyms they could be exchanged with. So put it in your diary. Put in is to insert in a diary or calendar. However, put back a time is to revert a time to the way it was before, or to make the meeting of the time earlier, but not at a later time. Whereas call off is to postpone the meeting until later. Bring forward is to meet at a later time, but not earlier. So this implies a change in schedule again. Deal with is to sort out problems or try to resolve a problem. So this is an attempt at resolving an issue. To look into something or look into a matter is to investigate. This could be used in finance, economics, banking, and also any other type of investment, transaction, or even business transactions as well as a whole. Weigh up the advantages or disadvantages. Now, of course, it's important to also understand the opposite of every new phrasal verb that you may learn or come across. So, what are the opposites of the phrasal verbs we've done so far? Come up is another phrasal verb. To come up means to appear suddenly, out of nowhere. And to step in is another phrasal verb meaning to interrupt something or someone, usually a person. To cut in means to interrupt a conversation that's already ongoing. Go on is a phrasal verb, which means please continue. So this is what an English speaker would say when they wanted to be polite. Etiquette is important in meetings as well. To press on is a phrasal verb meaning to continue, to move forward, and to insist. So there's a certain force or insistence that goes with using this phrasal verb. And I'm afraid we'll need to press on. There you go. The next one is drag on. Here we go. So when a meeting drags on, okay, drag on, then that means it's gone on too long and it needs to stop soon. So think of how you could use these phrasal verbs in sentences of your own so far. But let's move on now to learn more about the form and function and how to tell them apart from other types of collocation. You may already be aware of some phrasal verbs and you may have heard them before. You may also be aware that phrasal verbs are a type of collocation and they are fixed, which means they can't be changed. And they come with either a preposition or an adverb, or a preposition and an adverb, or two prepositions as well. However, do be careful because the verb in isolation and when added to a preposition or adverb could change slightly or drastically. So when adding that preposition to the adverb or verb, the original meaning of the verb will or might change. Such as in the case of throw, pick, and take, which are different when added to a preposition. They change in meaning. However, wake up and sit down are relatively the same as their verbs when the verb is in isolation. So wake him or wake him up mean more or less the same thing. Please sit down, or sit here mean more or less the same thing. However, throw away this ball or throw out this food does not have the same meaning as throw me the ball. So throw, the verb in isolation, does not have the same meaning as this phrasal verb throw away or throw out, which means to discard, to reject, or to do away with. Pick can have a multitude of different uses. You can pick the kids up from school, you can pick up the kids from school, or you can pick and choose your friends. To pick means to select when in isolation, but to pick up means to go for, to call for, or to put in your car, or to take away with you. Now, similarly, take and take off aren't used the same or in the same way. So I took my laptop with me to the office this morning. Using the verb take in isolation here does not have the same meaning as when we say I took off my coat before the meeting. So think about how you'd use these phrasal verbs in context and how you've used them previously. Also, that will take us to the difference between transitive and intransitive and separable and inseparable phrasal verbs in the next few slides. Right, so remember phrasal verbs consist of a verb with one or two particles. When they include two particles, you could have a maximum of 3 words in the phrasal verb. I am looking forward to my holiday is an example of a verb with 2 particles. And I get on with my father is an example of a verb with 2 particles. Now let's have a look at other types of phrasal verb and their form and function. When it comes to talking about intransitive phrasal verbs, intransitive phrasal verbs are always inseparable. So inseparable or non-separable phrasal verbs can't be separated at all. You could say, I came up with an idea, or I came up with it. And you can say, I want to tell you about a great idea I came up with. But you can't say, I came up it with, or I came up an idea with. And we'll see why very, very soon. You can say, Jim is coming back from Italy soon, but you can't change the position or placement of these particles. My sister and I get along very well, but not my sister and I get very well along. I told him to go away, and he needs to grow up, but not he needs to grow himself up. Please hurry up, but not please hurry yourself up or please hurry you up. So these are intransitive and inseparable. We say, he stood up and walked away without using an object to separate this phrasal verb. Now, as we can see here, these types of phrasal verb cannot be separated at all. For some verbs, this is because they are intransitive, such as these verbs on this page, on this slide, and they can't take a direct object with them. We can say, my job isn't very well paid, but it gives me enough to get by. So get by can't be separated by an object. I grew up in London, so grew up can't be separated. Now let's move on to talk about the phrasal verbs that can be separated. These are called separable phrasal verbs, and they are generally all transitive. Look at the position and placement of the verb versus the preposition or particle versus the object or the pronoun. You can actually use these in a variety of ways. These phrasal verbs are really variable and flexible. They can be used together or they can be separated. So we filled our forms in and we filled them in are both correct. Or we can say we filled in our forms to shorten the sentence. You can say I looked the word up, or you can say I looked it up. And you'd put the pronoun it in between the verb and the preposition. You could also say I looked up the word in my dictionary. I paid the money back, or I paid it back, to replace the object. I threw the bread away is correct, and I threw it away is also correct. But I threw away it would not be correct because this is a transitive separate, meaning that in this type of phrasal verb, the pronoun it cannot be used at the end of a sentence or phrase. However, you can say I threw away the bread, but again, we can't say I threw away it. You can say they called the concert off, or they called off the concert, or they called it off. All 3 methods are right. You can say, I tried on a dress. You can say, I tried on the dress or I tried it on, or I tried on the dress, which is fine. Please turn the light on, or please turn it on. Or could you please turn on the light, which is just as good. Can you turn up the volume? Can you turn up the music? Can you turn the music up? Or can you turn it up are all correct ways of saying the same thing. I wrote his name down. I wrote down his name. Or I wrote it down if you want to use the pronoun instead, perhaps because you want to avoid repetition. So think about how you'd use transitive separable phrasal verbs, with the object in the middle of the phrasal verb or towards the end of the phrase. Now we'll move on to look at how we can use transitive inseparable phrasal verbs. Remember that some phrasal verbs cannot be separated at all, as we said earlier. But other non-separable phrasal verbs can take an object. So they are transitive, but they are inseparable. Because if they have a pronoun as a particle, the phrasal verb is non-separable. Therefore, you can't separate it, because the object must follow the preposition, such as in these cases. You can say, I came up with a great idea. But you can't say, I came up a great idea with. This is also true when using a pronoun. You can say, I've got a great idea. I just came up with it now. But we can't say, I came up with now it. Okay, so how do we use this type of phrasal verb? Well, this is transitive, which means we definitely need an object, but we can't separate them. I don't get on with my brother, or I don't get on with him are both correct in this case. Just don't put the object in between the phrasal verb, and don't change the position of these types of don't change the position of these particles within the sentence. I looked after the children, or I looked after them are both correct. However, again, do not try to put the object in between. So you can't say, I looked them after, or I looked the children after. He's looking for his keys, and he's looking for them are both correct. But don't put the object in between. I searched for my ring, or I searched for it, are correct. And likewise, she takes care of the garden, or she takes care of it if you want to replace the object, are both correct. So think about how you'd use phrasal verbs and how you can utilize them in your next emails or your next report, or perhaps in your next speech or presentation or meeting. And now, if you've correctly understood how to use phrasal verbs both in a transitive and intransitive way, in a separable and non-separable manner, you can now try the C1 Advanced English Grammar exercise. Here we will put the right word in the right order. It's called word order when we talk about syntax. Let's have a look at these C1 Advanced level phrasal verbs. Can you put the words in the preferred order to make sentences? How would you put this sentence in order? That would be, my best friend never lets me down. How would you put this sentence in the right order? That would be, let's set up a meeting. As soon as possible. And this would be correct. How about this sentence? We'd say, he's an easy person to get along with. And here we'd say, please put your books and papers away when you're done. I need to use the table after you. So please put your books and papers away when you're done, I need to use the table after you. You could also rearrange the sentences to say, please put away your books and papers. But in this case, you can do both. It's up to you. Unfortunately, the business deal fell through at the last moment. So, unfortunately, the business deal fell through. Fell through is the past simple of fall through, the phrasal verb. In this sentence, we would say, I ought to cut down on caffeine. I ought to cut down being the phrasal verb, and that means to reduce your intake. In this sentence, it would be, I'm behind on my work, but I'll make it up next week. I'm behind on my work, but I'll make it up. So make up is the phrasal verb in this case. And finally, a new investor is going to take over the company and all of its subsidiaries. A new investor is going to take over, and that would be the phrasal verb. And your answers should all be accurate. Now you've got the tools with which to use phrasal verbs in an accurate way, in a cohesive manner, and perhaps more natural way. Thank you for watching today's video tutorial. If you enjoyed today's video, if you liked the content and you would like to see more of these types of videos, then please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Also, get in touch with us at womslearnenglish.com to learn more about the types of courses we offer. Or you can email us at office@womslearnenglish.com. See you next time.